My sister looked me up and down at her high society engagement party, sneered at my handmade dress, and whispered loud enough for the room to hear. "Hide your low-class work. My fiancé is a SEAL captain, and he hates unimpressive people." Everyone laughed, and my own mother nodded in agreement. I didn't scream or cause a scene. I just smiled, smoothed down my skirt, and stayed quiet. But the moment her elite fiancé walked over, looked at my face, froze completely, dropped his crystal glass onto the marble floor, and whispered in absolute terror, "Dear God, it's the Blizzard hero." The entire room fell dead silent. He didn't just recognize me. He knew the secret debt of honor that could strip away everything my family owned in a single second. Follow my story until the end to see how our arrogant trap completely backfired, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this reaches. My sister looked me up and down at her high society engagement party, sneered at my handmade dress, and whispered loud enough for the room to hear. "Hide your low-class work. My fiancé is a SEAL captain, and he hates unimpressive people." Everyone laughed, and my own mother nodded in agreement. I didn't scream or cause a scene. I just smiled, smoothed down my skirt, and stayed quiet. But the moment her elite fiancé walked over, looked at my face, froze completely, dropped his crystal glass onto the marble floor, and whispered in absolute terror, "Dear God, it's the Blizzard hero." The entire room fell dead silent. He didn't just recognize me. He knew the secret debt of honor that could strip away everything my family owned in a single second. Follow my story until the end to see how her arrogant trap completely backfired, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this reaches. My name is Victoria, and at 31 years old, I've spent most of my adult life existing as an invisible shadow in a family that worshipped only one thing: superficial perfection. Growing up in our household was an exercise in conditional affection, where my younger sister, Chloe, was treated like living royalty while I was expected to quietly blend into the background and clean up the messes she left behind. While Chloe was handed brand new luxury cars and designer wardrobes for doing absolutely nothing, I worked 2 jobs through college, earning my degree in structural logistics and pouring every spare ounce of energy into building an honest, independent life for myself. I never asked my parents for a single dime, and frankly, I never wanted their charity. I preferred the quiet peace of my own small apartment, far away from the exhausting theatrical displays of wealth and status that my mother and sister thrived on. But cutting ties completely is harder than it looks when they still manage to drag you back into their orbit. 3 weeks ago, my phone buzzed incessantly with a digital invitation wrapped in gold foil and digital velvet. It was from Chloe, announcing her high society engagement party at a luxurious private estate on the edge of the city. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I had better things to do than sit through hours of passive-aggressive comments about my career choices and my quiet lifestyle. But then my mother called, her voice dripping with sharp, manipulative insistence, telling me that missing the event would bring public shame upon the family name and that my presence was mandatory. Reluctantly, and purely to keep a fragile peace, I agreed to go. I didn't have thousands of dollars to spend on a custom designer gown, so I spent 3 days meticulously sewing and tailoring a simple, elegant emerald dress of my own, believing that dignity and neatness would be enough. That was my first mistake. The moment I stepped through the grand mahogany doors of the estate, the heavy air of elitism hit me like a physical blow. The ballroom was packed with wealthy elites, local politicians, and high-ranking military officers, all laughing and clinking crystal champagne flutes under sparkling chandeliers. I stood quietly near the edge of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water, hoping I could just remain unnoticed until I could politely slip away. But within minutes, Chloe spotted me. Draped in a blinding white silk dress that cost more than my monthly rent, she marched straight toward me, flanked by a circle of her wealthy friends. Her eyes swept over my handmade emerald dress with undisguised contempt, her nose wrinkling as if she were smelling something foul. That was when she leaned in close, looked me dead in the eye, and delivered the insult that she thought would completely destroy my dignity in front of high society. Hide your low-class work. My fiancé is a SEAL captain, and he hates unimpressive people, she hissed with a cruel, triumphant smirk. The women standing around her burst into sharp, mocking laughter, while my mother, who had just walked up behind us, nodded approvingly and told me not to ruin the aesthetic of the party. My heart pounded against my ribs, and every muscle in my body tightened. They expected me to break down, cry, or run out of the room in absolute humiliation. But instead of giving them the satisfaction of a scene, I took a slow, deep breath, kept my posture entirely rigid, and offered them a calm, unbothered smile. They thought I was defenseless, a weak outsider drowning in their shadow. They had no earthly idea that the quiet sister they loved to mock was carrying a secret so massive it could obliterate their entire evening. What my family never understood, and what they were entirely too arrogant to ever discover, was that the quiet, modest life I chose was actually a deliberate shield. While they spent years parading around country clubs and drowning themselves in unearned debt to impress strangers, I was operating in a completely different world of high-stakes reality. 5 years prior, while finishing my degree in structural logistics, I was quietly recruited by a specialized federal and private disaster relief logistics division. Because of my uncanny ability to map complex terrain and coordinate emergency infrastructure under extreme pressure, I became a core asset for remote crisis operations. But my most defining chapter happened 2 winters ago during what the media dubbed the blackout blizzard in the high-altitude mountain passes of the Pacific Northwest. A catastrophic winter storm had trapped an entire commercial transport convoy and a stranded civilian bus carrying dozens of people, including high-profile government officials and military dependents, in sub-zero whiteout conditions. Standard rescue teams couldn't even get close. The avalanche risk was too high, and the communication arrays were completely dead. I volunteered to lead an unheralded, covert reconnaissance and supply airdrop extraction on foot, navigating treacherous ice cliffs and sub-zero gales to guide every single survivor to safety. To the media and the military command, I was known only by my call sign, or the title given by the survivors, the Blizzard Hero. But the federal government wasn't the only entity that owed me a debt of honor. During that exact operation, one of the elite Navy SEAL team leaders operating in the sector was critically injured and trapped under an ice shelf. I dug him out with my bare hands, hauled him 3 miles through the blizzard on a sled, and kept him alive until the extraction chopper broke through. That SEAL captain was none other than Miller, the very man my sister was now proudly marrying. Miller knew my face better than anyone because I was the last person he saw before losing consciousness in that frozen hellscape. Yet, because my family refused to pay attention to anything outside their own shallow social circle, they had no idea that the low-class sister they despised was the exact legend Miller had sworn his life to protect. They thought they were building an empire of prestige. In reality, their entire future was built on top of a ticking time bomb, and the fuse was about to burn all the way down. Standing there with my quiet smile while Chloe and my mother basked in their own cruelty, the tension in the grand ballroom shifted dramatically. The ambient chatter and clinking glasses seemed to fade into the background as the heavy mahogany doors at the far end of the hall swung completely open. The crowd parted like a predictable sea, murmuring with instant admiration and awe as Captain Miller made his grand entrance. He walked with the unmistakable, rigid posture of an elite military leader. Broad shoulders, sharp tailored suit, and an expression of supreme, unearned confidence that matched my family's worst traits. He was the golden boy of the evening, the trophy fiancé my sister had constantly bragged about to anyone willing to listen, treating him like living proof of our family's supposed superiority. Chloe beamed instantly, her toxic smirk widening into a radiant, predatory grin as she abandoned her circle of friends and rushed across the polished floor to wrap her arms around his waist. Miller wrapped one arm around her, flashing a practiced, charming smile to the adoring crowd while his eyes scanned the room like a commander inspecting his troops. But as he kissed my sister's cheek, his gaze drifted past her shoulder and landed directly on me, standing alone near the pillar in my simple handmade emerald dress. At first, his eyes held that same condescending flicker of corporate elitism that my mother and sister wore, assuming I was just another low-status nobody hovering near the edges of the room. But then, something shifted behind his eyes, a sudden flash of profound confusion that instantly wiped the arrogant grin right off his face. He blinked hard, his pupils dilating as he stared past the glittering chandeliers, trying to reconcile the elegant, poised woman standing before him with the freezing memories locked deep in his past. My mother didn't notice the strange hesitation, stepping forward with a glass of champagne to proudly introduce us. "Captain Miller, darling," my mother purred, her voice dripping with synthetic warmth. "This is just a distant relative of ours, an outsider who unfortunately doesn't understand high society, but we tolerate her presence tonight." Miller didn't answer my mother. He didn't even hear her. The color began to drain rapidly from his cheeks, turning his sun-weathered skin a ghostly, sickly white. He slowly pulled away from Chloe's embrace, his breathing turning shallow and erratic as the terrifying puzzle pieces finally fell into place in his mind. He looked down at my face once more, and the terrifying reality of who was standing right in front of him hit him like a physical blow. The crystal glass of champagne in Miller's hand began to tremble violently against his knuckles. The ambient chatter of the high society guests seemed to stretch and distort, replaced by the ringing silence of a soldier facing an unforgettable ghost from his past. Without warning, his fingers went completely limp. The expensive crystal slipped from his grasp and shattered against the polished marble floor with an explosive crash, spraying champagne and sharp shards of glass across the shoes of the stunned onlookers. Chloe let out a sharp, offended gasp, jumping back as the liquid splashed against her pristine white designer dress. "Captain Miller, what on earth are you doing?" she shrieked, her face flushing with immediate embarrassment. "Are you out of your mind? You just ruined your own celebratory toast." But Miller ignored her completely. He didn't look down at the mess, nor did he offer an apology to my furious sister. Instead, he took 2 stumbling steps forward, parting the crowd as if he were walking through a waking nightmare. He stopped inches away from me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and glassy with a mixture of raw terror and absolute, unshakable reverence. The room held its collective breath, watching in absolute bewilderment as the fearless Navy SEAL captain, a man decorated for unwavering bravery under enemy fire, looked entirely ready to drop to his knees. Slowly, his lips parted, and a breathless, trembling whisper escaped his throat, cutting through the silence of the grand ballroom. "Dear God, it's the Blizzard hero," he murmured, his voice cracking as the haunting memories of that frozen mountain pass flooded back. My mother's mouth dropped open in speechless shock, while Chloe stared back and forth between her fiancé and me, her mind completely unable to process what was happening. They had spent the entire evening treating me like an unwanted, low-class beggar who didn't belong in their pristine world. Now, the very man they viewed as the ultimate crown jewel of their family's social status was standing before me, trembling in absolute awe. I didn't flinch or look away. I simply held his gaze, a quiet, knowing smile touching the corners of my lips as the devastating truth of the moment began to dawn on every single person in the room. The heavy, suffocating silence in the grand ballroom was broken only by the sound of my mother's ragged breathing as the horrifying reality began to settle over her. Chloe stepped forward, her face twisted in frantic denial, grabbing Miller's arm and demanding to know why he was bowing down to a woman she had just labeled a low-class beggar. But Miller violently shook her hand off, his eyes blazing with absolute fury as he turned to face the stunned crowd. He didn't hold back, loudly exposing the truth of who I was and the unpayable debt of honor he owed me from that frozen mountain rescue. Worse still, as the veil of secrecy tore away, the financial reality of the evening collapsed instantly. The entire high society venue, the extravagant catering, and the elite security detail had all been booked using provisional corporate credit lines backed by Miller's family syndicate, contracts that were legally tied to the Federal Emergency Logistics Network I directed. With a single cold word to my legal team via my phone, I authorized an immediate freeze on every single account funding their fraudulent display of wealth. My father watched in absolute horror as his corporate banking apps flashed red, locking out their funds and exposing the mountains of hidden debt they had desperately tried to conceal. Chloe burst into hysterical tears, realizing her dream wedding and her high-status life had evaporated in less than a minute. My mother tried to reach out, her hands trembling as she whispered pleas for forgiveness, but I didn't even slow my pace. I turned on my heel, adjusted my coat, and walked straight through the double doors, leaving them behind to drown in the ruins of their own arrogance. I didn't need their approval, their status, or their money, because true power isn't about what you project to the world. It's about standing tall when the illusion finally burns to the ground.